They decided Carter wouldn't last before she ever spoke a word. The buses rolled in before sunrise, headlights slicing through the coastal fog of. One by one, recruits stepped onto the grinder, boots hitting concrete in uneven rhythm. Some were built like linebackers. Others carried the quiet confidence of prior service. Was neither. She was lean, compact, her hair cut brutally short, duffel slung over one shoulder. And she was the only woman. Eyes followed her immediately, some curious, most amused, a few openly hostile. Someone muttered, "This is a joke, right?" Another snorted, pretended not to hear. She learned that skill long before Bud S., how to let words pass through her like wind through broken glass. The instructors didn't introduce themselves. They never did. They exploded instead, voices ripping the fog apart, commands slamming into nervous systems. Push-ups, sprints, dive into the surf, roll in the sand, over and over until bodies were soaked, skin raw, lungs on fire. Within the first hour, someone vomited. Within 2, someone quit. By noon, arms shook uncontrollably as she held a boat overhead with her crew. The rubber edge bit into her shoulder bone. She adjusted her stance, jaw clenched, refusing to let the tremor spread. The men beside her noticed anyway. "Jesus," one whispered, "she's slowing us down." Another added louder, "If we fail, it's on her." Stared straight ahead. She focused on counting breaths. In, out, her father's voice echoed faintly in her mind, "Pain is just information, decide what to do with it." When they were finally released, she staggered toward her gear, fingers numb. That was when it happened. A recruit stepped into her path, blocking her. He was taller, heavier, confident in the way only someone who'd never been underestimated could be. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You know they don't want you here," he said quietly. "You're not built for this." She tried to move past him. He leaned closer. "This place kills people," he continued. "Men, you're going to die or worse, get someone else killed." For a moment the noise faded. The ocean roared in her ears. She smelled salt, sweat, and fear, her own, sharp and undeniable. Doubt crept in, poisonous and familiar. What if he's right? She didn't answer him. She couldn't trust her voice not to shake. That night she lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling, muscles twitching involuntarily. Around her, recruits whispered about injuries, about quitting, about the bell. The brass bell sat outside, polished, tempting. Ring it 3 times and the pain would stop. No shame, no questions. Pictured her, the narrow range behind her father's old house. The way he'd corrected her breathing when she was 13. The way he'd said, "If you ever choose something hard, finish it." At 400, the light snapped on. "Get up." Chaos erupted. Boots hit the floor. Adrenaline surged. An instructor strode down the aisle like an executioner. "Welcome to Hell Week," he announced calmly. Swung her legs over the bunk, heart pounding, not with fear but something sharper. Outside, the bell gleamed under floodlights. And for the first time since she arrived, wondered not if she could survive. But what it would cost her if she did. The Pacific waves smashed against the sand like angry fists. Hell Week had begun in full force, and Carter already felt the ocean trying to consume her, body, mind, and pride. The recruits were running on 0 sleep, 0 warmth, and 0 mercy. The instructors didn't speak, they barked, gestured, and punished with precision. Every misstep had a consequence. Gritted her teeth as she carried the heavy boat overhead, her hands raw, slipping against the soaked wood. Around her, men cursed, slipped, staggered, but she kept moving one step, one breath at a time. The wind tore at her uniform and hair, sand stung her eyes, but she refused to collapse. Not yet. She had learned long ago that survival often came down to stubbornness. And the recruits noticed. They whispered, they laughed. "Look at her," one said under his breath. "She's barely holding it together." "She won't make it to the next hour," another predicted. Could feel their eyes on her back, assessing her, waiting for her to fail. Part of her wanted to falter, to sink into the sand and disappear, to hear the sweet chime of the bell and let everything end. But another part, quiet, relentless, refused. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Not yet. The first evolution ended with her soaked, shivering, and gasping. But there was no reprieve. Next came log PT, carrying massive timber through sand over and over, each repetition a cruel echo of her own self-doubt. Her arms screamed. Her shoulders burned. Her lungs were raw from screaming instructors and icy gusts. When she faltered for a split second, someone muttered, "See, told you." But refused to collapse. She clenched her fists, ground her teeth, and pushed the log forward, step by step, inch by inch. By the evening, exhaustion had become a living thing. Hypothermia crept into her muscles. Her vision blurred. Teeth rattled uncontrollably. Fingers and toes burned numb and then raw, then burned again. Every nerve screamed surrender. Every instinct screamed quit. The medics circled like vultures, watching for signs of collapse. At 300, during a night surf passage, the ocean decided she wasn't going to leave quietly. A massive wave slammed her under, filled her mouth and lungs. Panic surged. For a terrifying heartbeat, she couldn't find the surface. Her body shook violently, muscles cramping, lungs burning. The world narrowed to a single point: survive. Hands gripped her and dragged her onto the sand. She coughed, gasped, shaking uncontrollably. A medic knelt beside her, wrapping her in a thermal blanket, eyes wary. "You're done," the instructor said flatly. "Your body's failing." Stared at him, shivering and drenched, teeth chattering. Rage flared, an unexpected warmth in the freezing night. "No," she whispered. "Give me 5 minutes." The instructor studied her. He expected defeat. Then he nodded once and stepped back. 5 minutes became 10. 10 became another evolution. Each moment, each challenge, she made herself endure. Every time someone whispered she'd fail, she endured more. Every insult, every doubt, she stored, a quiet ammunition for later. By dawn, fewer than half the recruits remained. Faces hollow, eyes haunted, bodies broken, but still moving, stumbled onto the sand, gasping. Pain lanced through every joint, but she survived. And she knew something terrifying. She hadn't just survived Hell Week, she had changed it. For the first time, the men around her didn't just see a girl struggling. They saw someone who refused to die. And that realization made them look at her differently. Some with awe, some with fear, because survival wasn't enough anymore. She was becoming a threat. And as the fog lifted over the Pacific, stared at the horizon, mind already calculating the next battle, because she had learned the first rule of Bud S. Hell Week doesn't care if you live or die. It only cares if you endure. Her endurance had only just begun. The night was merciless. Wind whipped salt and sand across the training beaches and the surf pounded relentlessly against the shore. Carter's body felt like it had been dismantled and reassembled wrong, bones screaming, muscles quivering, lungs raw from hours of inhaling salt spray. Yet still, she moved forward. Every step, every stroke, every push through the freezing water was a decision to refuse to quit. At 300, during a timed surf passage, the ocean nearly claimed her. A towering wave slammed her into the surf, pulling her under. The cold was instantaneous and cruel, searing into her lungs, freezing her limbs, crushing her chest. Panic clawed at her mind. She could barely find the surface. Salt burned her eyes and throat. She flailed, powerless, until strong hands dragged her to the sand. Collapsed, shivering violently. The medic's thermal blanket felt like wet paper against her skin, barely protecting her from the creeping frostbite. The instructor knelt beside her, calm and lethal. "You're done," he said simply. A part of her wanted to nod to accept it. She was numb, broken, exhausted beyond measure. But another part, a stubborn, furious ember, refused. She glared at him with teeth clenched, voice barely audible. "No, give me 5 minutes." The instructor stared, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. Then he stepped back. 5 minutes passed. 10, 15. His body shook violently, yet she forced herself upright. Her legs wobbled, her fingers trembled, but she moved forward. Her lungs screamed for oxygen, but she refused to collapse. Around her, recruits watched in disbelief. Some silently acknowledged her strength. Others, simmering with resentment, muttered under their breath about luck, about fate, about how she shouldn't even be here. Sleep deprivation was now a constant, crushing weight. Eyes burned, head swam, and every sound, every scream, every barked command felt amplified in her skull. The recruits' morale had fractured. Whispers of quitting floated through the fog. However, had stopped listening to the whispers. She had stopped caring about acceptance. She existed only in the next movement, the next breath, the next second of endurance. When the final evolution of Hell Week ended, only the strongest remained. Bodies were mangled, faces hollow, minds frayed. Stumbled forward, her body soaked and bruised, teeth chattering uncontrollably. Her gaze swept across the remaining recruits. Many had doubted her. Many had hoped she would fail. And yet here she was. For the first time, she realized that surviving Hell Week didn't earn respect. It earned attention. The instructors, quiet and watchful, noticed her stamina, her determination, her ability to keep going when the ocean, the sand, and her own body were screaming for surrender. And so did the other recruits, but not all looked upon her with admiration. Some looked at her with something colder: apprehension, jealousy, fear. because they sensed something in her that they didn't understand yet, was no longer just the small, quiet girl who had joined the boat crew. She had become something more, something dangerous. By dawn, the fog over beach had lifted. The ocean was calmer, the sand etched with the marks of the fallen, the exhausted, the persistent. Stood among the survivors, shaking, raw, every inch of her body screaming, yet her eyes were sharp, calculating. She felt a strange exhilaration, a mix of relief and certainty. She had made it through Hell Week when so many hadn't. But as the sun rose, illuminating the battered faces around her, she understood the real challenge was only beginning. The recruits who had whispered, laughed, and threatened, those same people, would not forget her survival. They would challenge her in every way possible, socially, mentally, and physically. The first rule of survival, realized, was endurance. The second was being ready for war on all fronts, not just against the ocean, the sand, or exhaustion, but against the people who would rather see you fail than succeed. And as she pulled herself together, shivering and raw, one thought burned through her mind. They think I'll quit next. They think they've won. They have no idea what comes next. The camera of the story would have panned across her face here, capturing every drop of salt, every line of pain, every glint of steel in her eyes. Carter wasn't just surviving Hell Week anymore. She was preparing to dominate it and everything beyond. Her next battles would be quieter, sharper, and far more dangerous. And they had no idea she was just getting started. Hell Week was over, but Carter's fight had only just begun. The physical trials might have ended, but the psychological battlefield was merciless. The recruits who had once whispered about her weakness now looked at her with suspicion. Their resentment was palpable, a silent current that ran through every formation, every drill, every mess hall gathering. She had survived the impossible, and that alone made her a target. They didn't confront her openly, at least not yet. Instead, the ostracism was surgical. Equipment disappeared. Maps went missing. During land navigation exercises, no one offered a hint or guidance. Small mistakes, stepping off course, misjudging terrain, were a chorus of invisible blame, and any error she made was quietly noted, shared, and used to fuel rumors. One evening, while hunched over a compass and map under a dim lantern, overheard a conversation she couldn't ignore. "If she fails the next drill, it won't be on us," one recruit whispered. "If she doesn't, someone's going to be embarrassed," another replied. Her stomach twisted. They weren't just indifferent, they were actively hopping for her failure. Closed her eyes, letting the sounds of the room, the rustle of maps, the quiet breathing, the distant hum of the generators, sink in. She felt a familiar old sensation, isolation. But this time she didn't feel fear, she felt focus. Every whisper, every glance, every silent calculation from her peers became fuel. They didn't know it yet, but she would turn their doubt into her advantage. She started training alone. At dawn, she would run past the point where recruits usually stopped. She swam farther against stronger currents, her body breaking and rebuilding with each stroke. She lifted heavier logs than anyone else dared. Every hour spent alone honed not just her body but her mind, sharpening her awareness, patience, and instincts. Then came marksmanship practice. This was the one place where her isolation became an advantage. Without distraction, without the noise of her peers, she focused. Breathing slow, heartbeat steady, she aligned her sights, calculated distance, adjusted for wind and elevation. One shot, bullseye, another shot, bullseye. The instructor watching her from the observation deck frowned. He had seen many candidates, some good, some exceptional, but was something else. There was a precision in her movements, a quiet confidence in her decisions, a focus that cut through the chaos of the world around her. The bullying didn't stop, if anything, it intensified. Some recruits whispered insults while she loaded her rifle. Others tried to sabotage her equipment during exercises. Noticed, of course. But she didn't retaliate, not yet. She learned to watch, wait, and wait for the right moment to act. And then came the moment that would define her path. During a long-range shooting exercise, the wind shifted unexpectedly. Most of the recruits struggled, their shots drifting wide, their frustration growing. Paused, sensing the air, feeling the subtle changes, calculating the trajectory. She exhaled slowly, focused, fired. Bullseye. Again. Bullseye. Silence fell across the range. Even the instructors, who rarely expressed surprise, exchanged glances. The lead instructor walked down the line, scrutinized her posture, her breathing, her rifle. Finally, he spoke quietly, almost to himself. "You're not just good, you're precise, dangerous." Lips curled into the faintest smile, though no one saw it. She didn't need their approval. She had survived Hell Week, endured isolation, and turned doubt into strength. She had proven to herself most of all that she could thrive even when the world seemed determined to break her. And yet she sensed that something larger waited on the horizon, a challenge that would push her further than any wave, any drill, any whispered threat ever could. Something that would demand not just endurance but mastery. Her peers continued to watch, to doubt, to scheme, but no longer cared. She had discovered a truth that no one else seemed to grasp. The quietest, most isolated soldiers often become the deadliest. And she was ready to prove it. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand. Adjusted her gear, eyes scanning the dim beach, mind already moving forward. Every breath, every heartbeat, every step was a rehearsal for the battles ahead. Because isolation wasn't weakness. It was preparation. Carter was just beginning to learn how lethal preparation could be. The morning sun glinted off the rifles at the advanced marksmanship range. Carter stood silently, the weight of the weapon familiar and precise in her hands. The others shifted nervously, muttering under their breath. This wasn't just another exercise. It was the first evaluation that truly separated hunters from survivors. The wind howled off the cliffs, unpredictable and vicious, a cruel test even for the strongest shooters. Most recruits fumbled. They adjusted sights too late, miscalculated distance, cursed under their breath. However, moved like a ghost through the chaos. She studied the environment, the sway of the grass, the shimmer of heat over the sand, the patterns of the ocean mist, and adapted instantly. Every breath measured, every heartbeat catalogued, every flick of the scope precise. Her first shot rang out. The target's center splintered. She didn't flinch. She adjusted for the wind, exhaled slow, and fired again. Another bull's, a third. Each shot landed cleanly, impossibly so, even for seasoned marksmen. The other recruits froze, some glaring in disbelief, others whispering about luck. Didn't hear them. She never did. Her focus was absolute. The lead instructor descended from the observation tower, walking slowly toward her, eyes sharp. He studied her stance, her breathing, her concentration. No one had ever performed like this in their first advanced marksmanship evaluation. Few in years had achieved such precision. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he asked quietly, almost reverently. "My father," replied, voice steady, calm. "Before he died, he taught me patience. He taught me to see the shot no one else sees." The instructor nodded. A subtle shift passed between them, a recognition of raw potential. Then, almost casually, he said, "Pack your gear. You're moving to sniper evaluation." The words hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Around her, the recruits froze. Some gaped. Others clenched their jaws, fury burning behind eyes. The whispers started immediately. "She's going to take the top slot. She's unstoppable. This isn't fair." Didn't react outwardly. She knew the truth. This was the moment she had been preparing for since Hell Week. Every sleepless night, every wave that slammed her under, every taunt, every injury, it had led here. The training hadn't just made her endure, it had honed her. She had turned isolation into focus, doubt into fuel. That night in the barracks, a former tormentor confronted her. His voice low, sharp, venom-laced. "You think this erases everything? All the Hell Week humiliation, all the times we told you you'd die." Sighs met his, cold, calm, unflinching. "It already has," she said simply. "No threat, no need, just the truth." The next morning she arrived at sniper school, a quiet place where patience, observation, and deadly precision ruled. Unlike Bud S., here there were no instructors screaming orders. The challenge was subtler, deadlier. Every error, every hesitation could mean failure, or worse, simulate death in a field exercise. Her first stalking exercise began at dawn. Hours of crawling through mud, balancing weight, and reading terrain stretched her to her limits. The wind picked up, visibility dropped, and her spotter froze under pressure. Took control, whispering corrections, calculating distance and elevation with a surgeon's precision. When the target appeared, she fired, dead center. The instructors exchanged glances. They had seen many talented shooters, but few with the composure to lead, adapt, and strike under that kind of stress. Was more than a candidate now. She was a force to be reckoned with. Word spread quietly through the school. The girl who had barely survived Hell Week, the one everyone doubted, had become lethal. Her former peers would not soon forget her. Some watched, jealous and fearful. Others whispered her name with a grudging respect. But didn't seek approval. She sought mastery. Every shot, every exercise, every moment alone in the fog, mud, and sand forged her into something far beyond what anyone had imagined. As the sun dipped behind the cliffs, casting long shadows over the sniper range, loaded her rifle, checked her scope, and exhaled. She knew one thing with absolute certainty: the world had expected her to fail. They had been wrong. And the shot that would define her life had only just been fired. Sniper school was nothing like Carter had imagined. It was colder, quieter, and deadlier than anything Bud S had thrown at her. Here, survival wasn't enough. Precision, patience, and instinct were everything. One miscalculation could simulate a fatal mission failure. One lapse in judgment could erase weeks of effort. The instructors didn't yell. They didn't encourage. They observed. They waited. The first long-duration stalk began just before dawn, and her assigned spotter, a jittery young recruit with barely a month of field experience, crouched in mud and brush. Their target was a distant silhouette moving through uneven terrain. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the faint scent of salt and wet earth. His fingers gripped the rifle. Her eyes tracked every flicker of shadow, every rustle in the brush. Hours passed. The chill gnawed at her bones. Her spotter's hands trembled and could feel panic radiating off him. He whispered questions she didn't answer. She couldn't afford distraction, not from him, not from herself, not from anything. Finally, the command came. The target appeared for only a fleeting second, framed by the horizon and streaked with sunlight. Inhaled, slow and steady, heart rate controlled. She adjusted for distance, wind, elevation, even the shimmer from the heat of the morning. She exhaled, pulled the trigger. The target fell. Her spotter blinked, stunned. The instructors, observing from a hidden ridge, exchanged looks that spoke volumes. Shot had been perfect, calculated, lethal, and clean. Later, during debriefing, one of the lead instructors pulled her aside. His tone was low, serious. "You're not just good," he said. "You're lethal, but this is only the beginning. Pressure points are coming, situations designed to make you crack. People like you don't break, but most others will. You'll be tested in ways that aren't just about shooting." Nodded, barely breathing. She had expected this. The instructors wanted to see who could think, lead, and execute under total stress. Her mind had trained for physical pain. Now it was about mental endurance, and the pressure was about to escalate. That afternoon, a former tormentor from Bud S confronted her on the training field. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, anger blazing in his eyes. "You think being good with a rifle makes you better than us?" he snarled. Didn't flinch. Her response was measured, icy, unshakable. "It's not about being better than anyone," she said. "It's about surviving when everyone else counts you out." His jaw clenched. Words failed him. Others watched quietly, knowing she had survived their hell-week taunts, the isolation, the physical punishment, and now this. The pressure didn't end there. Over the next several days, faced simulations designed to test her composure. Moving targets in low visibility, rapid extraction exercises, communication breakdowns with panic spotters, and timed missions where 1 second of hesitation would simulate catastrophic failure. Every evolution was more demanding than the last. Adapted, she led silently, corrected mistakes in whispers, and executed flawlessly under duress. Every misstep by her peers reminded her how far she had come and how far she could go. By the final exercise of the week, and her spotter were alone in dense fog, crawling through uneven terrain. Her mind was sharp, senses stretched to the edge, heart rate perfectly controlled. She observed, calculated, anticipated. The target appeared for barely 2 seconds. She fired, headshot, success. The instructors nodded subtly, a rare gesture of approval in a world where praise was scarce. Felt no triumph, only a deep, quiet certainty. She was ready for the field, the missions, the chaos, the lethal responsibility that came with being a top sniper. That night, alone in the barracks, she stared at her rifle, hands trembling, not from exhaustion, but from the knowledge of what she now carried. Every lesson, every injury, every hardship had led to this. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was mastering survival and shaping it into power. And somewhere in the shadows, the whispers of doubt from her peers had begun to fade, but knew they would return. They always did. Because those who doubted her before had underestimated one crucial fact: Carter didn't break under pressure. She thrived in it. The storms of her life were no longer threats, they were fuel. And the world had yet to see the full force of the storm she was about to unleash. The final evaluation was more than a test. It was an orchestration of chaos designed to break even the strongest minds. Carter knew this. Every sense was on high alert. Every nerve screamed readiness. Hours of stalking, observation, and simulation had sharpened her to a razor's edge. She had endured Hell Week, isolation, and the pressure of sniper school. Now she faced the pinnacle, a scenario meant to push candidates past endurance into mastery. Dawn broke over the rugged training ground, and her spotter moved silently through the mist, boots barely leaving prints in the damp earth. Around them, simulated threats popped up unpredictably. Friendlies, hostiles, civilians, each figure a test, each movement a calculation. One wrong decision, one misfire, one moment of hesitation, and the simulation ended in failure. Hours passed. Mud dried on her uniform. Her body ached, every joint protesting, but she moved with precision, not panic. Her spotter, on the edge of fatigue and fear, faltered, leaned close, whispering instructions that were calm and exact. Breathe, count the distance, adjust for the wind, focus. Time became fluid. Seconds stretched into eternities. Sweat mingled with the mud, stung her eyes, and froze in the wind. Her vision narrowed, every detail amplified, the tilt of a branch, the shimmer of heat over sand, the flicker of a shadow. Finally, the target appeared, a fleeting figure at the far edge of the valley. Exhaled slowly, calibrated the shot, and fired. One clean hit. Another target appeared, she fired again. Headshot. Direct, lethal. The instructors watching from the ridge exchanged glances. One nodded slightly. This was no longer training. This was mastery in motion. After the final evaluation, the candidates gathered for graduation. Exhaustion etched every face. Pride and shame mingled in the air like dust. Names were called one by one. His name came last. Silence fell. The instructor's eyes lingered, measuring, evaluating. Top sniper, Petty Officer Candidate Carter, the lead instructor announced. Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then unstoppable. Some recruits stared in disbelief. Some averted their eyes, unable to face the one they had doubted, teased, and tried to undermine. The recognition was almost absurd too. She felt no triumph, not the loud, giddy kind. Her victory was quieter, steady, measured, earned in mud, sweat, and unbroken nights of doubt and fear. Her former tormentor, the one who had confronted her weeks ago, approached. Rage and frustration warred with respect in his eyes. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Met his gaze, calm as stone. "It's done," she said simply. "I didn't survive to prove you wrong, I survived to prove myself right." He turned away. The words lingered in the air, sharp and undeniable. Later, in the solitude of her bunk, traced the insignia of her newly earned trident. Her thoughts drifted to the journey, the biting waves of Hell Week, the taunts, the isolation, the relentless pressure of sniper school. Every trial had forged her. Every failure, real or anticipated, had been a lesson. The quiet victories mattered most. No one applauded the moments she crawled through freezing sand at night. No one celebrated when she corrected her spotter under duress or steadied her shaking limbs to make impossible shots. Those triumphs were hers alone. And yet she knew that the true challenge was only beginning. Graduation was a threshold, not a destination. Beyond these walls lay deployments, real-world missions, and decisions with consequences that were no longer simulated. The stakes were life and death, and the margin for error was microscopic. Had learned something critical. Survival was only the first step. Mastery required silence, patience, and lethal precision. The ones who endured the noise, the pressure, and the doubt, and emerged unbroken, were the ones who changed the battlefield. She lay back, staring at the ceiling, feeling the ache in every muscle. The trident on her chest felt heavier than metal. It was a reminder, not of victory, but of responsibility, vigilance, and relentless forward motion. And somewhere far across the training grounds, the ocean whispered, as it had on the first morning she arrived. It reminded her that challenges never ended, they only evolved. Carter, silent and unyielding, had earned her place among the best. And the world would soon discover what that meant. Years passed, but the lessons of Hell Week and sniper school never left Carter. She had moved far beyond the training grounds of Into the Shadowed, high-stakes world of real missions. Classified deployments, night operations, targets that disappeared into darkness the moment you blinked. The ocean waves she had once crawled through now seemed tame compared to the silent tension of a sniper nest on hostile terrain, hundreds of yards from unseen enemies. In a briefing room far from home, a commander pointed to a photograph on the wall. It showed a young woman in full SEAL gear, perched atop a rocky outcrop, rifle at the ready. "That's Carter," he said. "Best shot we've ever deployed." No mention was made of the humiliation, the taunts, or the nights she almost quit. No stories of Hell Week, of the relentless waves, the isolation, or the men who doubted her. Only results mattered here, measured in lives protected and targets neutralized. Adjusted her scope in a remote sniper nest, perched atop a ridge overlooking a hostile compound. The wind tugged at her uniform and scope, but she didn't flinch. Her breathing was steady, her pulse controlled. Every calculation, distance, wind, mirage was precise, honed from years of practice and trial by fire. She remembered the words whispered to her on the beach nearly a decade ago, "You're going to die." They had intended to intimidate her, to make her fail before she even began, but had learned a far more dangerous truth. The ones who tried to break you often don't survive to see the outcome. A flash of movement in the distance. Her target, unaware of the precision tracking her eyes had trained on him for minutes. One slow breath, steady trigger pull, headshot, clean, lethal. Her spotter, silent and vigilant, gave the nod. Mission complete. Every deployment had tested her in ways but never could. Ambushes, extraction missions, enemy patrols, civilians caught in crossfire. She had learned to remain calm, lethal, and precise when the stakes were higher than ever. Had survived storms, waves, isolation, and doubt, only to discover that the real battlefield was not the ocean or sand. It was the mind itself. Back on base, she stood quietly as her team debriefed. The men who had once doubted her in training now relied on her expertise implicitly. They didn't speak her name casually. It was said with respect, almost reverence. And didn't flaunt it. That had never been her style. She had learned that the most dangerous people were those who earned their power in silence, carrying their experience and their precision like a weapon concealed until the right moment. Late that night, she stood on the deck of the ship, staring out at the black water. The moon reflected off the waves, the same ocean that had almost claimed her years ago. She breathed in the cold air, muscles still aching from deployments, mind still calculating, heart still disciplined. She thought of the first recruit who had told her she would die, the ones who whispered, laughed, and hoped for her failure. She smiled faintly. They had been wrong. Because Carter had discovered a truth that few ever learned. The ones they try to break are often the ones who survive, adapt, and dominate. And she had become not just a survivor, but a legend. A SEAL sniper whose name would be spoken quietly, with awe in rooms far from home, in operations cloaked in secrecy. Her mission was never about recognition or glory. It was about precision, vigilance, and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. And in that quiet dedication found her power. The ocean whispered below her, a constant reminder. The world throws everything it can at you, but the ones who endure and master themselves write their own destiny. Carter adjusted her scope one last time that night, taking in the darkness, the stillness, and the opportunity. The world had tested her. It had almost broken her, but she had endured. She had mastered survival. And the world would never forget her name. Because the ones who survive are unstoppable.